Well, hello everybody. Putting a recording together here to help those of you who had emailed me and had some questions about the Chapter 6 assignment. So I put the assignment on the right side of the screen, as you can see here, and I've got RubyMine over on the left side. And so let's take a look at this and make some sense out of it. First of all, there's a typo in the top. It says write a program in Java. That should say Ruby. And I just saw that now. I'll have to fix that. But write a program in Ruby where the user inputs high temperatures for a certain number of days specified by the user. So the user is going to enter in the number of days for temperatures. You can see that down here in the sample run of a program where the user enters, in this case, a 7. And then there are 7 prompts that come up, one for each day. The user enters the temperature for each of those days. Now, as they enter these temperatures in, the program needs to make sure that those numbers range between -30 and 120. And if they don't fall into that range, then the program needs to ask again and again until they get it right, and then proceed to the next day. And then once all of the days have been entered, then the analysis kicks in, and the program calculates the average, and then it determines how many days were above the average, and then the lowest temperature and the highest temperature, and what days those occurred. So to do this, we're going to need to use an array, because we don't know how many days the user is going to give us. So we need something flexible that we can create. So let's take a look at this and put some comments in, some pseudocode basically, so we can get started. So I'm going to go up here into my RubyMine project, right click and select new file, and I will call this ch6asg. Now it's important to put the .rb at the end of your file name. RubyMine doesn't do this for you, so you need to make sure you add that in, and then you click OK. And then you'll see the file comes up, the blank window here, so you can begin entering code at this point. So first of all, I'm going to just start right out by putting in the preamble or the header for the program. So things like your name and course. And then a brief description of the program, which I will put here. Collects a series of high temperatures and reports the average number of days above average, the highest and lowest temperatures, and let's see, I guess that's it, right? I think that's everything. So, okay, so I'm going to come in now and just put in the steps that this program needs to go through to get this accomplished. And so the first thing we're going to do is ask the user for the number of days to enter. And once we do that, we're going to then prompt the user for temperature for each day. I'm going to put here I'm going to indent this just to say make sure temperature is between -30 and 120. So then we do the analysis. So the first thing we'll do is calculate average. RubyMine likes to keep adding pound signs every time you hit enter, and I don't really want that here, so it's a little bit annoying, but we'll make it work. Calculate the average, determine the number of days that are above average, and percentage of total. So in this case, if it were 4 out of 7, you'd be 57%. Then we need to determine the lowest temperature and day it occurred, and then the highest temperature and the day it occurred. Then finally we need to display results to the user. And one other thing I'll add here is at the beginning we want to put in a display instructions, which is basically going to be the stuff that you see in blue here, the beginning material there when you run the program. So that's our set of steps that we want to accomplish, and so now it's a matter of just taking each one of these and knocking it out. So that's what we'll do next. So I'm not going to put everything in. I'll let you guys do the instructions and so forth. I'll just do some of the basic things here, and then you guys can finish it off. But obviously the first thing we need to do is ask them how many days they want to enter in. So we'll do that with a print statement. And then we'll print out the question here. How many, actually let's do it this way. Please specify the number of days, colon, space. I'll put a space there. So there's a little bit of space between the cursor and the text. And then we want to get a number here, which is going to be an integer. And so we'll put the variable name number underscore of underscore days equals get_to_i, which converts it into an integer. And now this number needs to be obviously a number between 1 and some upper limit. We're not going to worry about the upper limit, but the lower limit should be 1. So for this to work, we need to check what the user has entered. So one way to do that is to use a loop that looks like this. Until number of days is greater than 1, print out a statement like this. Please enter a value of 1 or more, let's say. And then we'll put number of days equals get_to_i, like that. So it asks the question, gets a response from the user, checks that response to see if it's valid or not, and if it's not, it prints out an error message, asks for them to re-enter the value, and this loop here will continue to do that until the user gets it right, and then it will move forward from there. So at this point, let's go ahead and test this to make sure it's working right. And I'm just going to put temporarily a put s statement that prints out number of days, and just run this to see if it works. So I'll go ahead and click the run here, and it says there's an error. Now go ahead and okay, so when I go to run the program, as you can see here, it's prompting me for the number of days. And if I put in -3, it tells me to enter again. And if I put in 3, then it works. So that's looking good. So at this point, we'll keep going. So I'm going to hide that output window and move on. So I'm going to delete this line of code I put in. It's just temporary. And we'll go to the next step. Now, to prompt for the number of days here, the easiest way to do this is with a for loop. So for count in 1 ... number of days, And that is my for loop. So count will start at the number 1 and it will keep going until it reaches number of days. Now we need to create an array to hold all of these temperatures. So I'm going to go in, before I prompt here, I'm going to go in and create an array to hold the temperature values. So we'll say temperatures equals array.new. So that tells Ruby to create an empty array, and we're off and running. So inside of the loop, we're going to print out a statement that says day, and then the number, which will be count, and then this chevron here and a space. So we'll print out day 1, day 2, day 3, and so forth, up to the number of days. And then we need to get the input value. So we'll call that temp equals gets.toF. And just like we did earlier, we'll set up a validation loop here. So until temp is, it has to be greater than or equal to -30, and temp has to be less than or equal to 120. And until that's true, we're going to print out an error message that says something like, oops, please enter a value from -30 to 120. And then we'll say, whoops, then we'll say, again, temp equals gets.toF. Now, I'm going to take this comment here and move this up like that. So basically, we print out the day, we ask for the temperature, we check it and make sure that it's greater than or equal to -30 and that it's less than or equal to 120. And if it is, we're good to go. If it's not, we print out a message and have them do it again. So when we reach line 30, we know that we have a good temperature. So at that point, we're going to go to the temperatures array, and we're going to push our temperature onto the array, like that. And that's all we need to do inside of our loop. So this will build for us an array of temperatures. And if I want to test this out, I can go down here and say put s temperatures, and then let's just try it and see what we get. So if I say I want to put in 5 days worth of data, day 1, we'll just put good numbers in for now here to see if it works properly with good numbers. And we're getting good numbers. Run it again with some invalid data. So I'll put 50 and then I'll try like 500, and it prompts me to enter it again. So now I will try -40. It prompts me again, and I'll do -20, and it accepts the -20. So that's looking good. Now you'll notice an issue here. If I type letters in, Ruby is interpreting text as if it were 0. Now, there are ways to deal with that and prevent that from happening. We're not going to worry about that at this point. We'll assume the user is entering numbers. But in a future point, I will show you how to deal with that issue. But for now, we're looking good. We have our temperatures. Now, the next step is to calculate the average. Now, in Ruby, you'll notice that you have some helpful functions that you can ask an array to do for you. If I say temperatures dot, you'll notice as I scroll through here, there are a variety of functions or methods that you can call. And if you look through this, you'll notice things like min and max. And then, of course, you have things like shuffle, sort, slice, all kinds of different things that you could use if you wanted to. Now, if I try to type in AVG or average, I don't see anything come up. So does Ruby automatically calculate averages for us, or do we have to write the code ourselves? That's the question. Well, it turns out that Ruby does not have a built-in function to calculate the average, but what it does have is the ability to sum or add up all of the values inside of it. So if we want to calculate the average, what we can do is create a variable called average and set it equal to temperatures.sum divided by temperatures.size. Now, at this point, we have to keep in mind that it's going to add up all our temperatures, divide by the total size. Now, will average come out as an integer number, or will it come out as a floating point number or decimal? Let's take a look and see what we get. I'll put S average here, and let's just try it out and see what we get. So if I say I've got 3 days, and we'll do 60, 65, 70, and I get an average of 65. Well, that's a whole number. Let's see if we can get it to give us a decimal. So let's do 3 days. We'll go 10, 12, 13. And sure enough, we get a decimal number. It gives us, in fact, it's a repeating decimal. And so when you go to display this, you have some options. You can either round it up to the nearest whole number, or you can display it to a certain number of digits. And in our particular case, we want to show it to the hundredths place. So to do that, we're going to, well, let's worry about that later. We have the average. We're not ready to display it yet. We've just calculated it, and that's good enough for now. Now, to determine the number of days that are above the average, now that we have the average, we can do this next step. So we have to look at every temperature and compare it to the average. So we have to look at every temperature. So we're going to need a loop. Just like we had earlier, we can set up a loop, we can make it the same loop we had before. Count goes from 1 up to the number of days. And what we want to do here is ask a question. Is temperatures square bracket count greater than average? Now, if the temperature, the current temperature, now it's going to do this one by one, and for every time through the loop, it'll take the next temperature in the line. So the first time through the loop, it'll take the first temperature, and if that temperature is greater than the average, we want to count up the number of days that it's above average. So to do that, we need a counter. So what we can do is before the loop, we can create a variable called days above average and initialize it to 0. And then down here, we can increment that variable by 1 if we find a temperature above average. So it's going to start at 0, and then we loop through our array one by one, and for each element in the array, we're checking to see if it's above the average, and if it is, we increment this counter. When this loop is finished, the counter will tell us how many days are above average, and that's what the program is wanting. So we have that. Now it says here to determine the lowest temperature and the day it occurred. So again, we need a loop. Well, okay, there's different ways to do this, okay? If I look at temperatures, there is a function called min, and that's cool. It gives me the lowest temperature. The problem is it doesn't tell me which one it is. So I don't know which day. I know what the temperature is, but I don't know the day it occurred. So what we can do is, once again, set up a loop. And if the current temperature that we're iterating through, we find, if that temperature is equal to temperatures.min, in other words, if the temperature that we're currently looking at is the minimum, then whatever the value of count is would give us the day. So I can say minimum day equals count. Now once I find that minimum day, I don't have to keep going because I found it and I'm good. So I'm going to put break in here so that it will break out of this loop once it finds the correct day. And the highest temperature I'll leave for you to do, but it's very similar. And now, at this point, we're ready to display the results. So first of all, I can say the average, well, let's start here to make it look like the assignment. An analysis of the data reveals that, ... Put an extra put s above it so we get a gap, a break, extra line there. And now we're going to say put s and put some spaces in, and then the average temperature was. Now at this point I want to put in here the average, and I want to show it to 2 digits. I'm sorry, not 2, 1 digit past the decimal. Now there are many ways to do this. The way that I like to do this is to go and take my average here and then call the round method and round it to, in this case, 1 digit. So it's going to take my average, round it to 1 decimal point, and it's going to insert that number in right here. So the average temperature, which I spelled wrong, average temperature is, and then it'll print it out to 1 digit past the decimal. Then I can say temperatures were above average, and the days above average would go here, and then of the, and then we have the total number of days, which is just number of days, and then the word days after it. So temperatures were above average, and then puts the number in, then it says of the, and then another number, which is the total number of days. Then it prints the word days, and after that I want the percentage. So let's come up right before display results and put up a comment. So calculate data for display, something like that. And what we want to do is make a variable called percent days above average, which I'm just calling it that because I have a days above average. So percent days above average will simply be days above average divided by number of days. So I will take that and I'll put it right here. I have an open and close parenthesis, and I want to show a percent sign, and then right here I want to insert percent days above average dot round to 0 digits. I don't want any decimals in this particular case. As you can see, it's 57. We'll just assume that means they don't want to see any decimals. So it'll put days, and then in parentheses it'll put this number rounded to the nearest whole number, and then the percent sign and closing parenthesis after it. Let's try it out and see what we get. So if I say I've got 5 days, and I'm going to put, actually let's use the data in the assignment and then just see what we get. So we're going to 7, and we'll go 45, 44, 39, 48, 37, 46, and 53. Now we get an error. The error is coming on line 39, so we'll go to that. And the error is here. Now it says in the error message, undefined method greater than sign for nil class. What in the world does that mean? Well, let's take a look at the code for a second. Okay, so if I go up and look at this line, now the issue here is that we have a problem with the index. In Ruby, and this is true of most every language out there, when you create an array and you want to access an element, you pass a number in. This is the index to the array. And if you look at these numbers here, if these numbers are in my array, the first element here is actually element 0. The computer starts counting, and then with the first one, it assigns an index of 0 instead of 1. We always start counting at 1. Computers start counting at 0. Therefore, when we look at this code here, we have a loop that starts at 1 and goes up to the number of days. So for this to work, then, the index here, count, has to be offset by 1. So what we have to do here is put a -1, so that the first time through the loop, when count is equal to 1, the index into the array will be 0, because it'll take count, which is 1, subtract 1 from it to get temperatures 0, or temperatures sub-0 is how we say that. Going to have to do the same thing down here, put a -1 in. So when you're working with arrays, always remember that you have to index, and it's a offset of 1 that you have to apply to it. So let's see if that fixes the problem. I'm going to run it and put my data in again. And you'll notice now I get the average temperature of 44.6. That looks correct. Temperatures were above average 4 of the 7 days. That looks correct. But the percentage comes off 0. So what's going on there? So why are we getting this 0? Let's take a look at that. The percent days above average is calculated here. And if you look at the two numbers that are being divided, both of these numbers are integers. Now, when Ruby divides an integer by an integer, the result will be an integer. So the issue here is that the number comes out less than 1, comes out 0.57. And since that's less than 1 and the division results in an integer, you end up with a 0. So in order to make this work, we need to convert one or both of the values to floats or decimals, so that when it sees a float divided by an integer, or a float divided by a float, or an integer divided by a float, any one of those combinations, it'll give you a float result. So to do this, all we have to do is take our days above average and call the toF method on it. That will convert this value to a float. This one can stay as an integer, doesn't matter. As long as one of them is a float, that's all we need. Now this division will be a decimal number result, and this will be a decimal here. The only thing we have to do now is multiply it by 100, because it's going to be 0.57, which we want it to be 57. So we multiply it by 100, and then that should give us the correct result. And let's try that and see what we get when we run it. And now, as you can see, the numbers look good. I'm getting 57%. Everything's lining up and looking right at this point. So I'm going to stop here and let you guys finish it off, but I hope you find this helped. And if you have any questions, as always, feel free to drop me an email and I will help you out as best I can. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you guys soon. See you later.